Hi, I'm Emily and welcome back to the cl.knits Knitting Podcast. I'm a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia and thanks for joining me for episode 24. I have a good amount of knitting to share today and there is a little bit of a theme of me reviving old projects and making changes to them, so I'm looking forward to being able to share what I've done with you. We'll kick it off with what I'm wearing. This definitely fits in with the theme. This was a finished object in the last episode, but there were quite a few things I just didn't really love about it, and I was really hesitant on how much I was actually going to wear this. This is the Calm Down Tee by Lily Kate Makes, and I knit my version in Sandnes Garn Duo, which is I think around 55% wool, 45% cotton blend. And yeah, it was the first time I had used this yarn. It's a DK weight yarn and I think I've really learned that I just don't really go for DK weight summer garments. I like the look and just the wearability and how the fabric feels a lot more on my 4-ply summer knits. So at least that's a good learning that has come from this project. After I had finished this and kind of as I was working on it, I was a bit worried about finding this yarn itchy. Even though it is kind of advertised to be a good yarn substitute for 100% wool for those people who find it a little bit irritating, I was quite surprised to find this a little bit itchy. I have worn this for a full day earlier this week. We've finally been starting to get some slightly cooler weather, which has made it tolerable to wear a t-shirt like this. And I have to say, I barely noticed it. When I first put it on, I can kind of feel a little bit of a prickle, especially across my shoulders and my back where I find I'm the most sensitive. But yeah, by a couple of hours into wearing it, I didn't even think about it, which was actually really nice. I was quite pleasantly surprised. I don't think it's a yarn that I will reach for again. It's probably not like my new go-to yarn. I do prefer the Knitting for Olive cotton merino a lot more. If I was going to spend that amount of money on yarn, especially one that's from Europe, I would probably just go for Knitting for Olive cotton merino over this one. So those are kind of the basics. I did knit the second size of the pattern, and for the sleeves I decided to go up a size and also omitted the decreases that were included in the pattern. And I did this just from experience with set-in sleeves like this one. I always find the sleeves are way too tight if I knit the same size as my bust circumference suggests. That was not the right call for this pattern, which was a little bit frustrating, but thankfully it is just a short sleeve tee, so the sleeves aren't a huge amount of knitting. They're mainly just short rows, and then you have a tiny bit of ribbing here as a cuff. So it's not a huge amount of knitting for me to redo. After I had first knit the sleeves, I blocked everything, and I actually went away for a couple of weeks after I finished this and totally forgot that this was even a finished object. I didn't take it with me and I wasn't excited to come back and wear it. And usually, you have that finished object feeling and you're really excited to wear something, and even if it's not the right temperature, you still want to wear it. And that just showed to me that I really need to think about what I need to fix on this. And I had a gut feeling that it was the sleeves. They were just kind of bulging out like this and they were quite loose. They had quite a good amount of ease, and so do these, but just the way that they were fitting didn't really look great, and it didn't suit the amount of ease that I had going in the body and just the overall structure and style of the garment. So yeah, I did go back and rip out what I had knit and then knit as per the pattern. So I knit the second size and I included the decreases that are written into the sleeve. That has definitely helped with the shape and avoided that kind of ballooning out that was happening before. So I have definitely learned that sometimes you do just need to stick to the pattern, and there's a reason why a designer has included something in there, but it was so worth it and I'm really glad I re-knit them. The other thing that was bothering me about this top was how the hem on the bottom was quite tight. So there is some waist shaping in this garment, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it, but I was running low on yarn. So I did include it just to get myself a little bit more length from the yarn that I had. And I have to say now that I've reblocked it, I do prefer how it looks, and I'm quite glad that I included that. So before, when I had finished it and blocked it, I kind of just blocked it according to the schematic diagram, and that does include how wide it should be across the bust versus across the waist at the bottom. And yeah, it just, on my body, the way that it fits and the length of it, where it was hitting, just meant that it would balloon up and look kind of like, you know, have that mushrooming effect. And I just hated how it looked. It was really uncomfortable. I felt like I was constantly, you know, shifting it around, and I knew that that would put me off from wearing it. But I reblocked everything after I'd knit the sleeves and basically just stretched out the hem to its maximum width without obviously pulling too hard and breaking the tubular bind off that I had done. I'm glad that that was such an easy fix, because otherwise I would have had to go back and reknit the body and probably sacrifice a little bit of length because I was running so low on yarn. But I'll stand up and show how it's fitting now. So it is on the crop side still, but it is totally wearable, especially with high-waisted bottoms like these ones. If I reach my arms up, it does ride up a little bit, but not to the point where it will put me off from wearing it. And yeah, you can see that the hem now just sits really nicely over the waistband of these trousers, whereas before it was so tight, it would kind of sit like this and then have this really ugly bunching that I really was not going to wear. I'm much happier overall with how this looks now, and I'm glad that the bottom hem was such an easy fix, and I suppose the sleeves were as well. Turns out I just needed to follow the pattern. The one thing I'll say about the sleeves and this yarn is the rowing out is quite bad, and I don't usually have an issue with rowing out normally in my knitting. Even for the front and the back, I can see rowing out, which is a little bit annoying. It didn't get any better with blocking. The sleeves are a little bit worse, but I'm just going to live with it. I think it didn't help that I had frogged the yarn after blocking it in the shape of the sleeve, and I didn't reblock or like soak the yarn to get rid of any of the kinks. I just straight away knit it up again. I just didn't really want to go through all of that effort, to be quite honest. I was still a little bit hesitant about this project overall, and I wasn't 100% sure that reknitting the sleeves was going to make me want to wear it. So in the end it did, but that's okay. Like, it's not the end of the world, and I don't think it will stop me from wanting to wear this. As much as I love the silhouette and the design, I probably wouldn't knit another one of these exact tees. I think I would probably knit another one of Lily Kate's designs, but I would probably go for a 4-ply one. I know she has the Knitty Committee top coming out very soon. It's a 4-ply, like, fingering weight t-shirt, and it has long sleeve and short sleeve options, so I'm really tempted to buy that pattern when it comes out and knit myself a 4-ply set-in sleeve t-shirt instead. I might even end up going for something long sleeve, seeing as I am headed into winter now, and I definitely think a 4-ply like sweater basically would get so much wear. That is plenty enough about what I'm wearing, so let's move on to my first finished object. This is the Poet Scarf designed by Sari Nordlund. It's one of those super trendy, popular, small little like neck scarves that are floating around everywhere on Instagram right now, and I suppose have been for the past few years. It has this gorgeous lace motif all over it with moss stitch in the middle, and yeah, I really enjoyed knitting this. So I knit my version in the Juniper Moon Farm Herriot Fine, which is like an alpaca nylon sock yarn. It's quite high in the alpaca. I think there's only 10 or 20% nylon. I always forget the composition of this yarn, but it pretty much feels like 100% alpaca. It's really soft and has a beautiful drape, and also has quite a nice halo to it as well. The pattern is designed to be knit with a fingering weight strand held with like a mohair or a lace weight fluffy strand. I didn't have anything like that in my stash that I would feel comfortable wearing around my neck, and I also felt like I didn't necessarily need the extra fluff with this alpaca yarn. So I guess technically this is meant to be knit up in a DQ8 yarn, so I did start this originally with holding the yarn double, and I think I spoke about that and showed it in my last episode, but I was just really unsure about how the fabric was looking, and the drape was mainly my concern. When I was holding it with double, I just felt like it didn't unlock the potential that this yarn has, and I've knit this held single already into a sweater, so I knew what it would block out to be, and that's exactly what I had in my mind for this project. I ended up frogging what I had knit. I hadn't gotten super far into the pattern, like probably only to about this point on the increases on the first side, and I had done the mid-project block, and I just wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't motivated to pick it up and knit it, even though I really wanted to work on it. I just couldn't help but think that it wasn't as it was meant to be. I'm so glad that I frogged that and just decided to re-knit it, held single. It also meant then that I didn't have in the back of my mind that I might run out of yarn. The skein that I had was 98 grams, so it was a tiny bit on the light side and had fallen a little bit short of the full 100 grams. So I was thinking that I might cut it close, and I just didn't want to have to worry about that. I knew if I held this single that I would easily be able to finish the scarf. This just has the best drape to it. It's super soft, and it's exactly what I wanted. So I'm really glad that I ended up frogging what I had had. It really didn't take long to re-knit back to where I was. And I'm glad that I just listened to my gut instinct, especially after I had re-knit the sleeves on this and a few other things that I had started to like re-knit or reclaim yarn from. I was on a bit of a winning streak and felt like I was making good decisions with my knitting. So yeah, it was just nice to have that validation as well. I will say it's so tempting to not constantly be doing mid-project blocks on this. You just want to see how a fabric will change with blocking, especially in this lace motif. You just want to see how the fabric will open up and change after blocking. And it's just so beautiful. I'm really glad I went for this pattern. I was tossing up between this one and the Lalu shawl. But yeah, overall, I'm quite glad that I ended up going for the poet scarf. I ended up using 41 grams of yarn from the 98 grams that I had, so I have enough to even make another one the exact same. I'm not sure whether or not I would do that. Obviously, I wouldn't keep both for myself. I would gift the next one. But yeah, I really enjoyed knitting it. I loved doing all of the charts, like knitting from the charts. It took me a little bit to get into the swing of that, but once I did, and especially after I had printed all the charts out to like physically cross off, that made it so much easier. It was just, you know, one of those things that you just keep wanting to go back to and keep getting onto the next row or the next pattern repeat and eventually onto the next chart. There are 4 charts in this pattern. Mainly they differentiate when you're doing increasing and decreasing here, because you don't have a full repeat, you kind of need the extra chart. But once I was kind of up to this point where you're even repeating the chart a couple of times, it became a lot more intuitive and I could kind of, you know, sense where the chart was going. So I was interested to see how like the size of my scarf would differ from the actual pattern, considering I was knitting it with a single strand instead of doing it double or with the mohair. So the pattern says that you should reach a final blocked measurement of 100 centimeters in length by 30 centimeters at this widest point. When I wet blocked this, I did pin it out, not super aggressively. I just kind of pinned each end and then I pinned also this point up here. My final measurements came to 92 centimeters in length, so a little bit shorter, and then 26 centimeters in width. I think I could probably reblock it to get closer to what the pattern recommends, but I don't find that I really missed that extra length. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to wear this yet, so I'm interested to see whether I feel like it needs that extra length and width in there. In the pattern photo, Sari has it quite loosely tied in like a single knot like this, which maybe that would look a little bit better if it was longer, although I think it still looks quite cute as it is like this. I've also seen people kind of tie one knot in a tail and then thread the other tail through. That might be a more practical way to wear a scarf like this so it's not constantly coming untied. But yeah, I think the length is still fine and I'm quite excited to be able to wear this come winter. I definitely don't live in a climate where I need a really thick, bulky scarf. My Sophie shawl that I knit a couple of years back, the only time I've worn that is when I was away in England where it was really cold and I needed something like that, but I've never reached for that scarf since coming back here. I'm hoping something like this that's a little bit smaller will give me the warmth that I sometimes want around my neck, especially if I'm at home at my desk and I'm not moving around, but I don't want to put something really heavy and bulky on. I'm hoping that something like this will be what I reach for, and they're such satisfying, fun projects, so it would be really great if it's something I want more of in my wardrobe. I would definitely love to knit more of these and maybe even go to the Lalu shawl or one of the other ones that Sari Nordlund has, although I feel like every designer has their version of a little neck scarf, so yeah, it would be great to knit more of these. So obviously with a pattern like this, there is a wrong side that will be visible when you're wearing it, but I feel like the wrong side still looks quite good, especially with the moss stitch diamonds, because moss stitch is basically reversible. It still looks like it's like an intentional part of the design. There are obviously all of the pearl stitches on the back of like the leaf motif, but you still have the really nice knit columns running along. So yeah, I feel like even if you have the wrong side showing, it will still look presentable and still looks like it's part of the design. I was watching someone who has knit the Laulu shawl recently. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but they showed the wrong side of the Laulu shawl as well, and I think it was actually handmade by Florence, now it's come to me. But yeah, it does look basically like it has ribbing sections all along the back where the cables are. So that does tempt me to knit that one as well. Maybe that's what I could do with the leftover yarn from this and potentially gift that one. I'm not sure if I need 2 grey scarves in my wardrobe, but yeah, they look like a lot of fun to knit. My next finished object is my Clara Cabled Rib Sweater, and here is what the sweater is looking like now that it is all finished. I have a few things to say about this sweater. Let's start off talking about the yarn. I knit this using Drops Lima in the colour Beige Mix. I bought the yarn quite a while ago and had knit it into an Ara sweater by Petite Knit, but I just didn't really like the sweater. I never really wore it, so I completely frogged it and reclaimed the yarn to knit this sweater. And I think I still am glad that I did that. I think this sweater will get a little bit more wear than that one was getting. But it's definitely not the perfect sweater, and I'm not sure if those things are to do with me, to do with the pattern, or maybe a combination of both of those things. Overall though, I did really enjoy knitting this sweater, and I do like how it looks. I do really love cable details that run across the shoulder and on the neckline, and then also the ribbing on the cuffs and the hem is also in this beautiful cabled rib. I knit the second size of the pattern to give myself, I think, about 20 centimeters of positive ease. And yeah, I'm quite happy with the amount of ease that that has. My gauge was pretty close in terms of stitch gauge. The pattern gauge is 20 stitches by 30 rows, 10 centimeters, and I was getting 20 and a half stitches. And then I think my row gauge was quite off. Instead of 30 rows, I was about 27 and a half rows. So I probably should have paid a little bit more attention to that as I was knitting this, because I feel like that's really affected how the yoke fits. You might be able to see even on the hanger, it doesn't sit quite right, and it does just want to fall back a little bit, and I feel like the sleeves constantly want to twist around, and they just don't sit how I would expect a drop shoulder sweater to sit. If I try it on, that might be a little bit easier to explain what I mean. So as I just put on the sweater, I feel like the sleeves are twisting around in a very awkward way, and it just takes a little bit of shuffling around to get it to sit right. And I just feel like there's always this weird movement going on around here, and especially here where the sleeves are attached. You can see eventually I can get it to a point where it's sitting nicely and I'm not constantly moving it around, but it does concern me a little bit in terms of wearability for a whole day. I haven't had the chance to do that yet, so I'm intrigued to see how it will go. I knit this pretty much exactly according to pattern. I don't think I made too many changes. I was thinking about making the neckline a bit tighter and picking up fewer stitches, which I did originally. I think I already spoke about that, and the neckline was way too small. I could barely get it over my head, and it was just this really ugly puckering all the way around the neckline. So I ripped that out and re-knit it just according to pattern with the recommended pickup number of stitches. But to do that, I did have to quite drastically reduce the pickup rate than what is said in the pattern. And that might have something to do with my row gauge, but my row gauge is longer than in the pattern. So if anything, I would have fewer stitches, which doesn't quite make sense to me, and I don't really know what's gone wrong. Maybe it's something on me that I've misread in the pattern. Maybe I skipped a section or did something wrong, but I couldn't quite work out what had happened there. It was just something to note, but in the end it all worked out fine, and I'm quite happy with how the collar looks. It's definitely not too wide. I don't even have elastic in this yet, and yeah, it fits me exactly how I want it to. After I had knit this, I went ahead and blocked it just according to the schematics in the diagram, and I love it when patterns have that diagram so you know exactly how much to block it. Especially the Drops Lima, it does have a good amount of alpaca in there, so it can grow out a huge amount if you want it to. So I just find it so much easier when patterns tell you how much to block it out to. I blocked the length of the body and the sleeves just according to pattern, and I was anticipating them to come up a little bit short, and I probably should have just added length onto them anyway from the pattern. I was just a little bit worried about running out of yarn because I only had that set amount that I had frogged from the Aros sweater. So I was just a bit conservative on my yarn usage. I decided to just block it anyway as it was and then try it on and figure out exactly how much more I wanted to add. So I did end up chopping off basically the cable rib on the sleeves and added in a few more rows. I probably ended up adding maybe about an inch or inch and a half extra, and then I grafted the cable rib back to the sleeves. And I can kind of see it here a little bit where I've had to cut and regraft. I have wet blocked the sleeves again since I did that, but I think that's one of those things that only I would know because I have done it and I'm looking for it. But yeah, I really don't think it's that noticeable. It was so much better than having to reknit all of this cable rib. As much fun as it was and as nice as it looks, it was a little bit hard going on my hands, and I just thought it would be quicker to just graft the cuff back on after I had knit a bit more stockinette in the sleeve. It was well worth the effort of doing that because the sleeves are like the perfect length now. If anything, maybe I could go a tiny bit longer actually now that I have this on and I'm moving around a little bit, especially because the cuffs are quite wide. I feel like you can get away with slightly longer sleeves, and they do look a little bit funny if they're too short. There's definitely an improvement on how it was, but I'm kind of looking at it now thinking maybe I want more length. Perhaps that's something I can just block out a few more centimeters. And speaking of which, I probably will do that anyway for the body. The body is a little bit too cropped at the moment. Here is where it's sitting now, so it's kind of basically where my tee is, even a little bit shorter at the front. And for a sweater, I just kind of want it to be a little bit longer, otherwise I feel like I'm just going to get cold so easily wearing this. You can see it does have a slight high-low hem, which I quite like. I was a little bit worried about that and wasn't sure if I would like it, but I actually am quite surprised on how much, I like the look of that. But yeah, the front is just a tiny little bit too cropped. I think I'm just going to go and reblock everything and maybe just try and get a few more centimeters in the front and maybe even in the back. And then if that doesn't work, then I will reluctantly go back and add in some extra length on the stockinette. I'll probably do the same thing again and cut off the cabled rib and then reattach it on, just because, yeah, it's a lot of cable ribbing to be doing. They are easy cables. They're only 2x1, so I can easily do it without a cable needle, but I would just prefer not to if I didn't have to. So the sweater at the moment weighs 430 grams, and that's equivalent to 860 meters of this yarn, which is quite significantly less than the estimated meterage of the pattern. For the second size, which is what I knit, I was expecting to need about 950 meters, which is why I was a little bit worried about like the body and the sleeves and running out of yarn. So I definitely have enough yarn left to add a little bit of extra length if I want to. I am also adding some scraps of this into my sweet shop blanket. Before I decided to frog the Aros, I had already added in, I think, 1 or 2 squares onto my sweet shop. So I can always use the yarn up in that project anyway. But it was a little bit of a surprise that I ended up using significantly less yarn than what I had anticipated for this project. Speaking of yarn usage, I didn't mention it for my Calm Down tee, but that used quite a bit more yarn than I was expecting. So the t-shirt weighs 234 grams, which is 538 meters. However, the pattern suggests that you only need 491 meters, which I think is why I ran out of yarn. I was thinking there might be a buffer in there, enough for me to get away with the amount that I originally purchased. But yeah, that's interesting that I've had two experiences on different ends of the spectrum of yarn consumption. But yeah, I thought that was interesting to note. You might be able to tell I'm getting a little bit more into like the technical specifications and statistics of my knitting. Previously, I've just not really cared enough to check. Like, I've not really cared what my gauge has ended up being for a project or exactly how much yarn I've needed. I guess I'm just putting a little bit more thought into projects, and especially after I finish them, rather than just like taking off the blocking mats and then folding them up and putting them in my pile of handmade knits and then just hoping that I reach for them. In my job, we call it like a post-launch review, I suppose. So it's like thinking about how I could have maybe improved things, what I would do to like change things now, or yeah, just taking note of like the more technical stuff about my knits. I also think it's helpful for other people, which is one of the other major reasons why I think it's important to do this. I found myself looking a lot more at other people's Ravelry projects before I start a project myself. And if they've made any particular notes, if there's things that consistently come up that people have had to change or have had issues with, it's probably also helpful in terms of yarn consumption to see if someone's already knit it using the yarn that I want to use, because I know that can affect the meterage quite a lot depending on the yarn that you've used versus what it's been designed in or tested in, even for the designers to calculate those requirements. So I think it's just helpful in general for myself and for other people to just take note of those things a little bit more. It's way too hot to be wearing a woolly t-shirt and a sweater over it, so that has had to come off. I think that's everything I have to say on my Clara Cabled Rib Sweater. I think I need to wear it a few times to really decide on like this sleeve situation and how the sleeves sit. Perhaps I can reblock it. I did just follow the seam along here, like where you pick up on like the front and the back of the sleeve is where I ended up blocking it. Maybe I need to pull the seam forward a little bit and block it something like this instead. I think it's just going to be something I have to have like a wearability test on and just see how we go. But yeah, probably the length I can already tell we need a little bit of extra length into the body. You probably saw this when I had tried it on, but I just love how the cable runs all the way down the side here and seamlessly into the shoulder. It's so unique and just such a nice design feature. Okay, I'm going to add one more thing, and that is picking up for the collar. As I mentioned, I had to change my pickup rate a lot, like reduce it quite a lot compared to the pattern to get to the right number of stitches. And the other thing that you need to consider, and I'm not sure it's really explicitly written in the pattern, is how to line up these two cables that are on the shoulder seam. I didn't think about that too much when I had done it, but then I had a message the other day from Michaela from Mickey's Cozy Corner on Instagram, and she's also knitting this in this amazing pink colour. I cannot wait to see what hers looks like. But she was asking me how I managed to pick that up to like align the cables, and that reminded me that yeah, that wasn't something very explicitly written in the pattern to be mindful of when you're picking up stitches, especially if you're changing like the number of stitches you're picking up. It's good to keep in mind. But basically I started on the right shoulder here and just picked up 1 for 1 in the whole of the shoulder cable, and then picked up stitches along the back. And I'm pretty sure I had to do a multiple of 5. 1, 2. I just had to check that, but yes, it is a multiple of 5 that you need to pick up along the back, and then you'll be able to pick up 1 for 1 in the left shoulder seam. And then for the front, it doesn't matter a huge amount. I suppose if you wanted to be really technical, you could work out the middle point of the neckline and then make sure that you're picking up stitches to have like a cable run straight down the center front. But I don't think I did that. To be honest, it looks fine. It's probably a little bit off. I'm hoping that's not going to bother me now, because I've noticed that I have a cable like a little bit off to one side. But I suppose, yeah, if you wanted to be really technical and like precise in your picking up, you could also do that. But as long as the like shoulder cables matched up, I wasn't really that bothered about it. I think that is actually everything I wanted to say about this sweater. I do have one last finished object, which again falls into the category of it's been shown as a finished object, but like you could probably tell I wasn't happy with it and wanted to go back and fix something. And I just felt like I was on such a winning streak with fixing up this one, and I had frogged yarn from a different sweater and was really happy with how that had turned out into a new project. So I did go back to my Cognac cardigan. This is designed by Rian from Atelier Castin, and I absolutely love her range of patterns. I talk about them all the time, and her Cognac sweater and cardigan have become quite popular recently, which is so lovely to see, because they're absolutely wonderful patterns. So I knit mine in 2 different strands held together. The pattern is kind of meant to be knit in like a fingering weight held with a fluffy lace weight strand, and intentionally at quite a loose gauge to really allow the fluff to fill in the gaps and have a nice light airy fabric. I knit mine in 2 strands held together, so you can kind of see it's a little bit of a mild effect, but overall from a distance it looks a lot more like a cohesive pink colour. I knit mine in Bendigo Willamille's Luxury 4-ply in the colour Frost, which was like the main strand and is a white colour. And then I held it with a strand of the Chaska Aqu Lace in their light pink colour, which I think is the number 1001. I think they have 2 pink colours, and this was the lighter pink colour. It's this beautiful, really soft Sari alpaca silk blend, and is absolutely perfect for people like me who are just too sensitive to most mohairs. Whilst we're talking about the specs and everything, I knit the first size and the pattern for this cardigan. And for the body, I did go down a needle size, which is pretty typical for me in Maroon's patterns. I'm just a bit of a looser knitter. And as well, because this is a yarn that does grow quite a lot with blocking and like plumps up and fluffs up a lot. So I knew that I would probably need to do that. I ended up getting a 15 stitch gauge along the body, whereas the pattern calls for 16 stitches. So maybe I could have even gone down another half a needle size into maybe like a 5mm needle, but it's fine, like it fits me exactly how I want it to. I did knit the sleeves on the recommended 6mm needle because I was knitting the magic loop and I was getting quite tight. So I just wanted to keep the gauge nice and even. So basically what I wanted to show and talk about for this is the button band on the cardigan. So when I originally knit the button band, it took me a couple of attempts to get a needle size that I was happy with. I think I used originally a 5mm needle, which corresponds to the pattern, like in terms of number of sizes down from the body. And it was just looking really loose and too thick and too wide and nothing like the pattern pictures. And I think that's just me and my gauge, obviously when I'm double knitting. And as well, like I said, this yarn does have a tendency to fluff up quite a bit. So then I knit the button band on a 4.5mm needle. So after I had finished and blocked everything, I just didn't really love how the button band was looking, and I was kind of expecting to have to go back and fix it. I just didn't really want to, because for the second button band, like on the right side, you're picking up stitches for the button band and the collar, so you're knitting all of that at the same time. And it would just mean that I have to undo all of that and redo it. And I just wasn't really quite ready to do that. But yeah, after I had success with fixing other projects, I did just go back and do it. And I think I had it done within like 2 or 3 days. So it really wasn't that bad. That wasn't like a huge amount of knitting time dedicated to this. So yeah, I did go back and re-knit it on a 3.5mm needle, which is quite significantly smaller than what I had knit the body on, obviously using a 5.5mm. I was a little bit worried about it like puckering up too much, and you can definitely see I keep pulling it down because I can see that it is too like short and basically too tight of a gauge. However, this has not been wet blocked since I've added this button band back on. I gave it a very brief steam block just to get it like a little bit better. So I'm really not concerned. I think a wet block will completely resolve that issue. I'm also happy that I ended up doing this neckline on the smaller needles. I just felt like it brought the neckline in just a little bit extra than it was before. It was just a tiny little bit too open. Yeah, and it's like the perfect round neck now. The other issue that I was having before I reknit this button band was the buttons were sandwiched in way too tight to the button band, and it was like pulling apart at the buttons. And even though I had a good amount of ease in there, so it wasn't like too tight and it was just pulling across my chest, the buttons just didn't have enough room under them because of the thick button band, and it just looked really bad. I have known that there is a technique when you're sewing on buttons to fix that. I just didn't really think about doing it. I think when I originally put them on and kind of thought that I could block it out and everything would be okay, but really it wasn't. So whilst I reknit the button band, I thought I would take the time to put the buttons on properly and resolve that. So here's how the buttons are attached now. You can see that they're a little bit floppy and they're not sewn on super close to the actual button band, so it just gives enough room under the button here for the other button band to slide over through the buttonhole, and it just means that they sit so much nicer and it doesn't want to like pull apart like it was before. It's such an easy technique. I think Petite Knit years ago posted a reel doing it, and that had just kind of stuck in my mind, so I just kind of went along with what I thought you needed to do. And yeah, it ended up working really well. So basically when I sewed the button on, I had a knitting needle poked underneath and was pretty much sewing the button on with the knitting needle underneath, and it just allowed that little bit of extra room to bump up the button as you're knitting it and like have that extra room on the bottom. And then you hopefully will be able to see that I have wrapped my thread around that loose thread that was where the knitting needle was. So after I had secured the button enough, I took the knitting needle out and then wrapped my thread around the base of the button where that extra fabric or like where that extra thread was. And that kind of creates like an extra extended button shank. Obviously you can see these buttons do have a shank on them, but it's just not really long enough for this project. So it's just giving me a little bit of extra room to have the buttonholes go through and have the extra fabric there. It was so easy. I was kind of worried that I would have to pick new buttons for this cardigan, which I really didn't want to do. I feel like they're such a cute like match for the fabric and make it look a little bit more elevated rather than looking like a kid's cardigan almost. I was a bit worried about it looking like a kid's pink fluffy cardigan, but I feel like the buttons kind of avoid that from happening. Yeah, I'm very happy I managed to make these buttons work, and I can't wait to get some wear out of this cardigan. I think it looks so cute buttoned up fully, even with just the top button done up or fully unbuttoned with like a white t-shirt underneath. I think it will be a surprisingly versatile piece to have in my wardrobe. And I think I've said before, and Marine commented on my Instagram saying, I thought you said you don't really wear cardigans or like round neck cardigans, which I don't, but I feel like I am getting inspired to wear them a lot more now, and I'm reaching for the ones I have in my wardrobe. Especially last winter, I felt like at the end of winter I was really getting into wearing them. So I'm looking forward to seeing how many ways I can style this and how much wear I will get out of it. Those are my finished objects for this episode. I do have a couple of works in progress. I feel like I'm in a bit of an odd stage of my whips at the moment, and I'm not really sure what I'm doing or what I want to be doing, but we'll go through what I have been working on. My first whip is kind of a good in-between because it is like a half-finished object. I have one sock finished off the needles. This is just a pair of basic vanilla socks, just to have this yarn out of stash and into a project that I can start to wear. I've had this yarn for a couple of years now. It is the Hedgehog Fibers sock yarn in the colorway is called Dada, I think. It's 90% merino and 10% nylon, and yeah, it's a really nice base. I don't know what I was thinking when I went for this colorway. I remember being in Yarn Trader when we were in Adelaide, and I picked out a really nice skein of their own hand-dyed sock yarn in a very me colors. It was a neutral base with some really nice blue and brown speckles, and I love that yarn. And I thought, you know, that's a safe option for me. Maybe I try and go for something way out of my comfort zone, and this is what we ended up with. And there's a reason why you have a comfort zone, because I did not know what to do with this yarn. I thought about doing tops or a bralette or something, and yeah, I just was never going to wear it. So we ended up going with just some plain vanilla socks, which has actually been really nice. It's been, yeah, very soothing to have a plain vanilla sock on the needle. I'm not following any particular pattern. I cast on 56 stitches and I'm working on my 2.25mm shorties. I did about 15 rounds of 2x2 rib and then a super long leg for some reason. I think this is like a 60 round leg. I was working on this sock, watching the Formula One with some friends, and I didn't have my longer needles that I usually use for the heel flap. So that probably contributed to me putting off working the heel flap, as I just wanted to keep knitting and didn't have the right needles. So the leg is a little bit longer than I would normally knit, but I might end up liking that, who knows. And then I just did a regular heel flap with, I think this is called the Eye of Partridge, where you're like alternating where you're putting your slip stitches. I never know what kind of heel flap I'm going to do or how my socks are going to look. I don't really pre-plan them, I just do whatever I feel like at the time or what I think will look the best. I did knit a fairly long gusset, which I do prefer to do for my socks. I have quite a high arch in my foot, so I feel like this just helps the fit and gives a little bit of extra room around here. If I just pick up more stitches and gradually decrease them rather than, yeah, doing less. I just feel like then there's too much stretch across this part of my foot. I knit 40 rounds in the foot, and I think that's because I'd done an extra long gusset. It was not a lot of knitting to get to the point where I was ready to knit the toe. I just did a very standard wedge toe for these. And yeah, I just finished this afternoon before I sat down to record. So I have cast on the second one and done like 1 or 2 rounds of the cuff, just so then it's on the needles and it's like easy to pick up. I don't have to think about starting a second sock. Like pretty much as soon as I do the Kitchener for the toe on the second sock, as I'm sitting down in the same like time period, I like to straight away cast on the second one, just so it's on there and it's like I'm doing all the fiddly things at once. Like if I'm doing Kitchener for the toe, I may as well just cast on the second one whilst I'm in the mood to be doing fiddly things. And then, yeah, it's just like easy knitting for me to pick up. Because that's kind of what socks are supposed to be, right? Like they're supposed to be nice, plain, vanilla knitting, especially a sock like this. I'm not changing colours, I'm just knitting and enjoying it. The colours are definitely a choice. I don't love them. I think it is really fun, like having the grey base with all of these neon colours is very fun, and I can see for some people this would be like, you know, a really cool pair of socks, but yeah, they're just a bit too loud, a bit too bright for me. I do quite like the colour pooling on them. I wasn't sure about it, and it's not the most obvious. I think it is where that pink stripe is, and a little bit for the grey on here, and not so noticeable on the foot, which is interesting. I thought I would go back to having a bit more colour pooling. So we'll see what it looks like when I knit up the second sock and yeah, compare the colour pooling. So those are my first work in progress. My next rib is very random and not something I have knit before. It is a gift for my grandparents. I'll be going back to see them in like the end of June, and it will be my grandma's birthday, so I thought I would see if there was something I would want to knit her. And I am knitting a tea cozy, which is, yeah, something I've never knit before, and I thought it would be really fun. The pattern I'm following for this is called the Dog Tea Cozy, designed by Rian Anderson. You might have noticed in the photos that the dog does have a striking resemblance to an animated dog. It is supposed to be a grommet tea cozy. My grandparents have, I think, a small collection of like novelty knit tea cozies, which is so much fun, and they do use tea cozies like pretty much every day, I think. And my cousins and I have such good memories of watching the movies with them when we were younger, and I really hope it looks enough like grommet that they'll get why I've made it for them and not just made them a dog tea cozy. The yarn that I'm using is just from Spotlight. It is this pure wool Entwine. They're both like 8-ply yarns. So that's for the cream colour, and then the brown colour I'm using as a contrast is the pure Merino base. The main thing for this was that I really wanted a good colour match. That was the most important thing. I did think about finding something acrylic, but I couldn't find the best colour. This was like the perfect colour that I wanted. And just for me, in terms of knitting experience, I didn't really fancy working something like this at such a big gauge with acrylic yarn. As well, because tea cozies are meant to be insulating, I feel like wool is the obvious choice as well, just to help with that. I don't know how I'm going to show all of these pieces because it is knit in different pieces, and I will say I modified the pattern to knit everything in the round because I guess I'm just a like millennial Gen Z knitter and I like knitting in the round and I don't really enjoy seaming. I just feel like it's not as neat as knitting in the round, and I'm so used to doing that it's just like not really fiddly for me anymore. I'm just trying to find all of these pieces, and then hopefully there's an easy way I can show what it's starting to look like. So to knit this in the round, there was quite a bit of knitting flat, but parts that are joined in the round I think look better than if it was seamed. It's supposed to be knit back and forth for each panel, I think, and then you just seam up and leave a gap for each side opening here. So it did take a little bit of brain power, and I ended up drawing a diagram to kind of make that work like this. It is a paid for pattern, so I don't want to be sharing like too much about the like stitch counts or the measurements or anything. The diagram helped a lot, and I managed to figure out when to join each piece, or like when I was joining each panel, because you can see this one goes up higher than this one. I did also go down a needle size, so the pattern does call for an 8 ply like DK weight yarn, and you're holding it double throughout for most of the pieces, and it does suggest a 5.5mm needle, and I did start on that and it was pretty comfortable fabric, but I could see it was just ending up way too big, and I was worried about this yarn being superwashed, and I'll probably end up blocking it just to even everything out a little bit. Yeah, it would grow way too much, especially if it's over like a hot teapot. The steam would probably relax the wool anyway and it would just stretch out. So I did go down to a 5mm needle, and holding this yarn double, which is probably closer to a worsted than a true DK. I think it's 85 meters per 100 grams, so it's not quite worsted but not quite DK. It was so hard on my hands. I knit most of this in one sitting, which was probably not a very good idea, especially after I had knit that cabled rib hat and did a lot of that in one sitting, or like, you know, kept going even though my hands were sore. So I really regret doing that because there was no rush for this to be done. I was just in such a mood to be knitting on it. But I really need to be a bit more careful about that, and that's why I'm saying it, to hold myself accountable, that I will stop doing that. This was the first piece that I knit, and then you go ahead and knit the other things. So this is the head here, and I have filled it with like the polyester toy stuffing. I have a huge bag that I feel like every time I use it, it doesn't actually go down, and there's just always so much in there. And then I managed to get these sew on googly eyes, which are so cute. I think this is like what I'm excited for, is to put it all together and like see it come to life. Just holding the eyes on even, you can kind of see the shape of the head coming together a little bit better. Then I have a front leg. I only have one of these at the moment, and then I need to fill this, and then you do sew on to like shape the toes a little bit better. I've also knit 2 ears in the brown colour, but I'm not sure if I need to knit them a little bit bigger. I don't know if they're too small. But then I'm looking at pictures of Grommet, and his ears aren't like hugely oversized. Like they do just kind of go up and then straight down, but they just look so cute. And then he also has a nose, which again is filled with the stuffing. And then I think this will probably go somewhere around here. I think it's meant to fold in like this as a nose. So I'm quite excited to like put all of this together, and that's probably what's going to take the longest amount of time. On Ravelry, a lot of people did say like, actually knitting it was easy, it's just all the seaming and the assembling that takes ages. So I thought, if I knit everything around, makes everything a little bit neater, and then I save on a very long, tedious step. I'm already kind of not looking forward to sewing everything together and assembling it, just because if you do it wrong and you have to redo it so it looks right, like I don't want to have to keep redoing the same thing. Knitting in the round actually was quite easy for the ears, because I could just knit these magic loop and then Kitchener the top of the ear together. So that was actually so much easier. I would not have been able to make that look as neat as it does if I was seaming things, especially like on a cast off edge. So yeah, it was definitely worth it, at least for the ears. If you're going to make this and don't want to knit in the round, the ears are probably worth doing it. I just have the second front leg going at the moment, and you can see I'm working them on DPNs, which I don't really use very often, but for some reason I just felt like, yeah, pulling out the DPNs. Maybe it's the nostalgia of knitting something like this, which is what I would be knitting for years before I started making garments, and I have had these DPNs for such a long time. So I have one more front leg to knit and then his tail, and then I'll be done. I'll be ready to start assembling. I will say that I purchased the amount of yarn suggested in the pattern, which is I think 50 grams of the brown, which was plenty, and only 100 grams of the cream, which I was like, oh, that doesn't seem like a lot, but I'll just get one anyway, and then I can always go back and get more. And then I very quickly ran out of the cream yarn and had to go back and buy a second ball. And thankfully I did it as soon as I did. They had already put out like another dye lot of yarn and mixed it in with the same one, so that was a bit annoying, but I did manage to find another ball with the same dye lot. 200 grams of that yarn will definitely be enough to get me through the second leg, but that was just something that I thought is worth mentioning. If you wanted to knit this pattern, maybe just go and err on the side of getting more yarn, because it doesn't have like specific meters of yarn that you need. It just says weight, and I don't even know if it has like the recommended yarn to be able to calculate the meterage. So if you're in doubt, maybe just get the extra ball of the main color. So that's been a really fun project to be knitting on, something a bit different. Again, it is a little bit hard wearing on my hands, so I am really trying to pace myself, and I think all I did last night working on that project was that little bit of the leg. So I'm only doing little bits, and then as soon as I feel any like kind of discomfort in my hand, I put it down and we'll come back to it the next day or a few days later. There is absolutely no time pressure for this project. I have so much time to finish it, so I really don't need to be forcing myself to work on it. I have one more work in progress to share. Well, technically I have two whips. I do have my Sweet Shop blanket, actually. I can quickly show this now. I did add a few more squares onto it, and I love this blanket so much. It's been such a nice project. So here is the blanket so far. It's definitely getting up there with size, and I think for the size I'm making, this will be the total width, which is 6 squares, but I might end up adding more if I have heaps more scraps that I want to use. So I've added 3 more squares. This square I had already added, but then when I went to pick up and begin working on this again, like one of the bits of yarn on the edge had snagged and it was unraveling. So that was a little bit annoying. I just ripped out the whole square and re-knit it, and now it looks fine. I since added this brown and beige square with some nice tweedy yarn, which looks really fun. And then I added this pink square, and now I'm just in the process of adding a final one. This last square that I'm working on at the moment is in this really fun sock yarn from Circus Tonic Handmade. It's a sock base in the colour Galah, and I made a pair of socks out of this, which I love. They're probably one of my most worn pair of socks because I love the colour and I love the bird that this yarn is based on. I'd say these colours are actually super accurate to the actual bird, which is very impressive. So yeah, I'm just slowly working my way through the blanket, but that is a quick update on where I'm up to. My last work in progress is definitely the one I'm talking about last for a reason, and it has been quite a fail, but you know, these things happen to everyone, and sometimes you just can't anticipate it, sometimes you feel like you should have and you didn't, but here we are. I'll talk about it anyway. I'm hoping just talking about it will help me put my thoughts together a little bit, or maybe at least you might have an idea on what I can do with this yarn, or just some thoughts that you would like to share about this. This is a Tolsta tank, which is designed by Rebecca Clow, and the yarn I've used is a Knitting for Olive pure silk, and it pretty much looks like a finished object except for these ends that I haven't woven in, but this is definitely getting frogged again, which is kind of frustrating because this yarn has been reclaimed from another project already. As I said, I was on such a roll. I was doing really well, like fixing up projects and working with reclaimed yarn. So I thought I had the confidence to rip out my Tolsta tee, which I knit a couple of years back in this yarn. I just was never quite happy with the fit. I always find with a lot of Rebecca's patterns, the back neck sits far too low on me and it really annoys me, and I just prefer having a higher back neckline. You can definitely see even in this one, the difference between the front and the back neck is so minimal. I just prefer a neckline that either like sits across here or is like intentionally a scoop back neck. I just feel like this is an awkward in between, and I just don't like how it feels when I wear it. So the tee had that problem, and I also made it a bit too cropped and the sleeves too short, and I didn't run out of yarn. I had plenty of yarn left. I think I was just being a little bit lazy with knitting and wanted to finish it. And I also had heard so much about how much this yarn grows, and I was like, oh, I could just knit it too short and it will be okay, it will grow out, and then I'll be happy that I knit it shorter. That didn't really happen. Maybe if I had blocked it more and worn it more, perhaps. So yeah, I did end up frogging that, and I did wash the yarn and dried it and recaked it, and then I just went ahead and cast on this tank top. I did not swatch for this, which is probably where my first hurdle was. I usually meet gauge pretty consistently using the recommended needles in Rebecca's patterns, and I just went ahead and cast on with a 3.25mm needle. The gauge for this pattern is 24 stitches by 32 rows, and my finished gauge is 20 stitches, but also 32 rows. I don't know how that has worked out, but yeah, obviously it has grown out quite a lot width-ways, especially after blocking. I think because this yarn has been blocked quite a few times, that has contributed to that. But it's just made a garment that I know I am absolutely never going to wear, which is a bit of a disappointment. It was going really well. You knit this bottom up. So I started with this folded hem at the bottom, and I did knit this on slightly smaller needles, I think a 3mm, just to avoid a flaring. And yeah, you just work all of the body, and I did cut short by about 1 or 2 inches, maybe closer to 1 inch of length that is recommended in the pattern, just because I know I prefer things slightly more cropped and I was a bit worried about it growing out. Then you split off for the front and back, and yeah, do all of the shaping for the armholes and the neckline. And then I even went so far as to pick up for the neckline and do the folded edge, and the same on the armholes. And yeah, definitely by the time I had finished working all of this on the body and I was like trying it on a little bit, obviously it's quite hard to do with bottom up designs, I was thinking like, this has a lot of ease as it is. Is it going to grow a lot with blocking? I don't know, maybe I just need to trust the pattern and just go for it. Yeah, and maybe from the beginning I could kind of tell myself that I wasn't really happy with where this was going, but I just pushed on anyway and kept knitting. It was quite an enjoyable process in it, so maybe I wasn't thinking too much about what I was doing. This is far too big on me. It has way too much ease than what I like to wear. I knit the first size in the pattern, so I can't like go down a size and re-knit it to get less ease. What I would have to do is probably go down a needle size to actually meet gauge. So that leads me into what do I do now with this. I could go back to doing another tee. I could like re-knit the tank, but then I don't know how much I actually love the shaping of this. I would definitely need to raise the back neck. The neckline at the front even is like a little bit too in between a square and a round for me. I'm not sure if I love that, so I would have to modify that somehow. And also the armholes stick out a little bit. Even though I did try and block them in, I probably need to pick up fewer stitches just to avoid that awkward shape from happening. So unfortunately, this is going to get frogged again, and it's a little bit frustrating that I had to wait until I had knit the whole thing to like decide that, but you know, sometimes that's just what happens. And like I said, it was a fun process knit, so it's not all lost. Like I did genuinely enjoy knitting this. It's just now I'm gonna have to knit it into something else. At the moment I am leaning more towards going back to the tee but making changes, because I do prefer how that was fitting and how it looked and everything much more than the tank. I am just a bit more of like a t-shirt person than a tank top person in like ready to wear clothes even, so I feel like that's giving me the best chance of having something I like. I have been doing a bit of swatching, and I was looking at the modification like document that comes with the pattern, and there are so many different options for modifications you can make, and the one that I was most drawn to was the eyelet lace, and there are a few different variations. I think Rebecca has one just with eyelet lace rose like spread throughout the t-shirt, but there was another one I think one of the testers did with like a garter ridge alternating between the eyelet rose and then also having these garter ridges like surrounding the eyelets. I just feel like this yarn and the t-shirt was just kind of missing something, and I have a feeling doing a texture or something like this will just give me that like extra interest that I'm after. The colour is also not helping this yarn. It's such a boring summer colour. It doesn't really do anything for me, so I might also over dye, and I'm kind of thinking, do I dye the yarn now and then decide what to knit with it? Or do I knit something, see how I feel about the colour, and then potentially over dye that garment? Both of them have risks, and I'd rather not over dye anything if I can help it, so maybe I will just knit and see if I really don't like the colour. If I was going to over dye it, I would probably go for like a dark green, like an olive green, because it does have quite a lot of like green undertones to it in my opinion. Or something like a navy, but I don't know how I'd go with like the bluey green, I'm not sure. So I'm kind of leaning towards like an olive green colour to over dye this grey and just see how it comes out and hope for the best. I'm swatching on a 3mm needle just based on the gauge that I got on the 3.25 with this yarn. I should probably be swatching with yarn that's like actually also reclaimed rather than like the brand new yarn that hasn't been used at all. This is what I had left over from the tee. The one interesting thing that I noticed was the Tolsta tee has the same gauge as the tank, but is knit on a half a needle size up. Like the tank's on a 3.25, but the tee is knit on a 3.5, and they both have the same gauge. So I thought that was interesting to note. But I suppose needle size is always just a suggestion, and the more important thing is the actual gauge. I didn't notice that until I was like trying to compare the two and figure out what needle size I should swatch on. So like I said, I'm swatching on a 3mm now, but I may go down to a 2.75 even, just based on how much that grew. I just need to be careful of like the size that I choose and yeah, how much the yarn does grow, and whether I would be happier with more ease or less ease. I'm kind of thinking I would prefer less ease rather than more, so maybe I do just go down to the 2.75. But I think I'm just going to finish this swatch for now and figure out like the texture pattern that I want to include. I do like this garter ridge here alternated with the eyelet rose, like in the tester photo. I might do like 2 garter ridges and then the eyelet rose just to balance it out a little bit more. But yeah, I need to figure out the spacing between that and exactly what I want to do, and then maybe have a look at the pattern numbers to figure out how I'm going to space everything out. Because it is like a raglan tee, it's quite easy to just add in whatever modification you want, which is kind of the intention of the pattern anyway. If I do end up going for the tee again, I will definitely add more short rows into the neckline, because I know that's something that will just make that t-shirt a lot more wearable for me. So that is one modification I will definitely be making on top of adding in the texture. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. I feel like I'm a bit all over the place with my projects at the moment. I'm quite happy with how my finished objects have turned out, and the fact that I've gone back and fixed a few things. That's given me a good confidence boost. But then that Tolsta tank has like given me a bit of a knockdown as well, which I feel like that's probably quite normal for a lot of knitters, or at least let me know if that's your experience as well. I'm not sure what I want to be casting on next. I don't really have any plans. I'm like planning to plan things, but yeah, just nothing has really fallen into place. I think I'm going to have a look through my stash and like the scraps that I have and see what I can make in terms of like smaller accessories. Thank you again for watching until the end. As always, I would love to know what you've been working on or what you have in your upcoming plans, and maybe inspire me to start something else. I'd also love to know what yarns you're using. I feel like that's really putting me off from starting a project at the moment. I feel like there's almost too much choice of yarn, and I'm not sure whether I want the yarn to dictate my project or pick a project and then choose a yarn. But yeah, let me know what you're working on, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!